We're going to, because we have limited time, and I know we'll have lots of questions. Now, some of you will have 30-second questions. Others will have questions that will take a minute. Some of you will have questions that take 5 minutes, and some of you will want to give 20-minute speeches. I understand all that. So what we do, we start off to maximize the number of questions. We start off with those of you who have 30-second questions. After those are exhausted, we go to the minute questions, then to the 5-minute, and then finally the 20-minute ones. Okay, just put up your hand if you have a 30-second question. Gentleman over here.
Hello, I have a question for Professor Scholes. Does that count for my time?
No.
I have a question for Professor Scholes. In 1998, after the collapse of LTCM, you must have faced a similar kind of bad feelings from a lot of people in the government saying, like, evil, greedy, bad fund managers who have caused a collapse of an institution. What was your response, and how were you able to carry the momentum of the good things that the financial instruments can do to the financial markets at that time, and how do you see the potential response right now in the present times?
This guy's tough.
That's an easy question. That's an easy question. Basically, I think that one of the interesting things that resulted from that was that all the financial institutions then learned themselves how to monitor hedge funds. And basically, we've seen really there's been hedge fund collapses. There's been a lot of Amaranth and a lot of other hedge funds have collapsed. Yet it's the case now the governments, especially in the G20, in France in particular, Mr. Sarkozy thinks that you have to regulate hedge funds. But the point is self-regulation occurred after that. Before, there was no margin requirements. Then there became margin requirements. There was no triggers on contracts. Triggers were put into place. There was different monitoring systems that were put into place by the banks themselves. And one of the great things about shock is that the entities and systems can learn from the shock and adapt. As Ms. Khan said, that basically that we don't know anything really, and that when shocks occur, we can keep growing. Why do you go to school? Why do people keep learning? If all us elders knew everything, there'd be no need for you to go to school. We tell you everything. And one of the great things about creativity and growth is that evolution occurs and learning occurs, and there was tremendous learning after that, and now the system is much better and richer. We'll still have failures as we continue to do, but it'll be a richer system. And that if the government impedes this learning or the changes that can occur, then obviously it's not going to be the betterment of society.
30-second question. Take the gentleman in the back. Stay away from the Americans for a while.
I would also like to ask Mrs. Scholes one question, the second one. And today these days we hear a lot about kind of mathematical models which are some kind of responsible for the crisis. And also we hear in the panel that one solution could be go back to simple ones as in the 60s. Do you think this is the right solution, or is just the problem that mathematical models are correct, but the people who use them didn't look at the assumptions? Thank you.
Well, I think we should ban mathematics. That seems to be a solution for our lives. If we just ban mathematics, we'd all be better. I think this goes back to the Middle Ages, where we ban other parts of things. Models or mathematics creates models or tools which help our intuition. Without modeling something or structuring something, no business can function. Nothing can function. And models are important to be able to help our intuition. Once we have a model, then our intuition can expand again. We can grow, and then our models change. I have a model of golf, and when I play golf, my model should be as good as Tiger Woods. But Tiger Woods has a much better model than the one I have. It's much richer. His dimensions are much richer than mine. Mine has a lot of error to it. all are what we do, and so we try to reduce the error and try to understand the error of life and go forward without modeling or thinking about a problem. All of us have to use mathematics or models in all our lives. We couldn't go forward without it. Now, the use of models, obviously you can misuse models, you can misuse intuition. Your intuition could fail you just as a model could fail. But that is the evolutionary structure. That's what we have to deal with. Sure, the people who use models without economics or without thinking about what they're putting in are going to fail. The rating agencies failed. They used incomplete and wrong inputs in the models that they had. And it was silly. There's common sense, too. I mean, you can't blame models. As you said, you have to think about who the users of models are, and you can misuse models. I thought when I played golf, I can give you one illustration I took in physics when I was in high school. I learned about the angle of reflection and refraction. And I said, wow, boy, I can now go to the pool room and play pool. Okay, and I used that model, and Lenny was there, and Lenny was the champion pool player. And I used my cue, and I doubled the length, and I saw the shot. He can lean me out. His dimensionality, even though he had no mathematics, was much richer than mine, even though I had mathematics and physics to help me, because he saw many more dimensions than I did. Anyone who uses the model and thinks that you're playing in the market against someone who's not going to beat you because their model's richer is foolish. But from what I learned from Lenny, how I can expand my model and grow and help my intuition. So models really help you grow and learn. Without mathematics, our societies would be much poorer. Much, much poorer.
Okay, 30 seconds. We have a gentleman over there.
My name is Paul. I have a short principal question. What do you think, why there is problem with implementing banking system based on 100% reserve?
I think a banking system on 100% reserve.
Reserves principle.
Pardon me?
100% reserves principle.
I think if there's guarantees by the state that on the banking system, we could have a banking system that actually, if there's depositors who think that they're buying a deposit, then fine, that can be backed 100% by depositors. The idea of having it then, in case if the bank fails, that we have to step in and bail out those depositors who thought they had a contract that was different from the contract they had. I'm fine with that. The idea is that then the bank has to raise its money in the public markets for risky activity. That's perfectly fine with me. But it's a question of reason. It's the guarantees that are behind this that create the difficulty.
Mr. Minister, do you want to add anything to that?
If I understood correctly, is 100% capital adequacy?
He's asking about a fractional reserve bank and not deposit insurance.
Nie, že koľkokrát banka môže požičať viac, ako sú jej vlastne príslušné vklady. Takže v Amerike to myslím 8 násobov. Môže 8-krát viac požičať, ako sú 8-krát viac.
Two technical questions for politicians.
Okay. Okay, we'll not get into fractional reserve banking in a moment here. Other questions? 30 seconds.
My question is, Mr. Scholz, that what do you think about inflation level in the European Union? Is there a possibility that it will go up or fall down? And by how many percent? What do you think?
I have to use a model to answer that question. Yeah, I think that central bankers will err on the side of inflation because they don't want to, if there is inflation, by printing money. And the question is that if the economies recover, we're going to have inflation and faster than anticipated. We'll have inflation, and so I think with all this money printed, it could create a large amount of inflation. When, I don't know, because depends on when we resolve the balance sheet problems that we have. And basically, there's a trade-off in terms of all the artificial consumption that we're trying to put into the system.
Other questions? Paul, standing up there.
Dobrý deň, môj meno je Lazar. Ja sa chcem spýtať teda všetkých diskutujúcich, že dnes už vieme, že ako kríza nastala, kde vznikla, a ako sa jej mohlo zabrániť. Myslíte si, že v súčasnosti existujú nejaké iné sektory, že sa tá kríza mohla nie priamo takýmto scenárom zopakovať, alebo respektíve boli tieto odpovede predtým, ako vznikla?
Just look at the measurement of where the debt overhang is. We have commercial real estate that hasn't had the write-offs or write-downs that are necessary. We have all the guarantee contracts of insurance companies where they guarantee that the principal will be returned with interest, and they invested in assets that have fallen dramatically. We've had student loans, consumption, all the pension funds that we have that are unfunded, the Medicare benefits and health benefits that are unfunded at the current moment, and the great increase in the debts that we have incurred and are going to incur in the future. Howard, and all that has to be unwound in the system, so it's going to take a long time to unwind it. The pension promises have been extreme, and the mistakes that have been made by pension funds thinking that they can promise their pension beneficiaries a promised payment or return, yet at the same time investing these monies in risky assets, thinking they have a long horizon, and therefore with a long horizon one should invest in long-term and risky assets. That's a mistake, because even though there's an expected return is higher on investing in stock or investing in higher yielding instruments, it's only expected. And the point is the shortfall could be very great. And as we see today, it's going to take, even for those plans that were partially funded, they were funded in very risky assets. We're going to have to figure out a way to pay off on those promises. And I think individuals will realize that the promises are not sacrosanct, that there's possibility the promises won't be paid off. That means they have to save. Look what happened in Japan. The state increased its spending to keep GDP up. It went to 160% of GDP is now the debt of held by Japanese citizens. Why are Japanese citizens holding this debt? The reason they're holding the debt is they realize that the pension promises that are going to be paid by the state will no longer be there for them, and they need to protect themselves. So what we've done is had government expenditure substituting for private expenditure, government investment substituting for individual investment. Individual investment is efficient, more efficient, much more efficient than government expenditure, is much more efficient than government investment. As a result, even though the economy has cleaned up its bad debts, it's cleaned up its bad debts at the banks, that has a huge debt overhang now by the state itself.
Okay, do the other panelists want to comment on that? Anybody else?
Možno len doplnenie, lebo myslím, že to bolo veľmi presné, ako je to vlastne komplexne dnes prepojené všetko. A v tom je práve možno novum tejto krízy, že v posledných rokoch miera prepojenia globalizácie svetovej ekonomiky enormne postúpila, že táto kríza je nová v tom, že reflektuje mieru vzájomného prepojenia nielen finančných trhov, ale vlastne všetkého. A v podstate zásadným problémom je, že ten život na pomery, nerešpektovanie rizika znamená vlastne teraz splácanie tohto života na nadpomery. A samozrejme, že zásah je v rôznych oblastiach rôzny. Tam sa prejavuje najmä na základe elasticity dopytu. Jesť sa musí, čiže dopyt po nevyhnutných statkoch samozrejme klesá menej ako dopyt po statkoch, ktoré nie sú nevyhnutné, keď je ten pokles nevyhnutný. A zároveň všetko, čo je prepojené s finančným trhom, ako sú penzie a ďalšie oblasti poisťovníctva, tak toto vlastne pán profesor vysvetlil, je zasiahnuté.
Any other 30-second questions? The lady over here.
Ja mám otázku ohľadom v zásade tých takých opatrení vlád, alebo teda americkej vlády, ktorá sa spomínala, takzvaná too big to fail, že teda nenechať padnúť, aj keď teda za cenu toho, že podporia ten pre budúcnosť ten morálny hazard. Čo si myslíte o tom, alebo ako by to vyzeralo, keby možno tá vláda bola vinná a podporilo takzvaný ten trhový masochizmus, že teda nech padnú, a aké by to malo podľa nich a podľa panelistov následky aj na globálnu ekonomiku.
Barbara?
Well, very quickly, the economy would grow, and the more government intervention we have, the diversities for enterprises and for investment. So if there is, like the current history that you obviously referred to in the United States, it was just a lengthening of the crisis. They do not solve the structural problems now. They would do if they close the entities, if they close the plants, and then they have to rethink and regain and reinvent themselves and create something new. So the more the government intervenes, the bad diversities for the economy and for the society.
One of the interesting points that is raised by this is that because of the belief that governments will bail out the institutions, we have contracting that exists today that makes us more interconnected. If we knew that the governments wouldn't bail out the banks out, then the contract interconnections would be different. And so the interesting point is the mess we created, means that we couldn't let them fail because it would cause this systemic event around the world. But if we had been warned they wouldn't bail them out in advance, then the form of contract would have been different to start with. So it gets circular. You say, well, why should we bail the banks out? Because we have to bail the banks out because we said we're going to bail them out, and if we said we're going to bail them out, then they took actions which themselves were based on the fact that they would be bailed out. If you do the opposite and say you won't be bailed out, debt holders, you will lose money. If you lend money to banks, other than the depositors who are 100% insured, and that's invested in government bonds, that if you have debt contracts, those debt contracts will fail. If the bank fails, you'll see a whole different form of contracting at the banks, and then there won't be excess risk-taking, there won't be bad production of bad activities and incentive contracts that need to be reformulated. All the pay at banks will be reformulated. All the ways in which contracts are settled will be reformulated. We'll have a whole different system if it's realized that banks will fail. And as a result of that, societies will be better off. But you have to set the premise first. Because if the premise is incorrect, you won't let banks fail. Actions will be taken that'll be far different from the view that banks will fail.
I want to add one thing there. If you say that some institutions are too big to fail, then what happens is their cost of acquiring funds is lower than those who we will allow to fail. So that automatically means they'll grow more rapidly, and you just, as Professor laid out, you actually add to the problem because then you have fewer and bigger institutions than you would if you would actually say everybody can fail. We've got time for a couple more questions. Yes, sir.
20-minute question.
20-minute question. No, we don't. We're still at 30-second questions. Well, once we exhaust all the 30-second questions, we go on to the longer ones. We have to do those first.
Dr. Scholes, since I know that you're very competent in philosophy through our discussion last night, let me ask you a more philosophical question. You've talked about the measuring of risk and incorporating it into our business model. And I wanted to ask you, in light of your philosophical notion of Kant, for instance, that we cannot know anything, and the importance of shock as a learning in experience to determine it, how do you assess the risk a priori and not a posteriori? That is to say, and who does it and what would be acceptable?
That's a tough question. Actually, the measurement of risk in our lives, we can be proactive or we can be reactive. We don't plan for anything and any risks, and we react to risks that happen to bite us or hurt us. That has a cost. I'm an option person. If you know there's risks, then there's flexibility. How much flexibility do you build into your planning? How proactive are you in planning? Now, sure, there's a cost of being proactive, keeping reserves, making sure that I understand the liquidity cost of liquidating my positions, and I act to run a business in a way that I have a flexible operating plan. I try to realize that I don't want to only plan for the best states to occur. I also plan for bad states and the possibility of having to get through those states. So that's being proactive or thinking in advance. Risk management is only trying to understand how to be proactive and not relying only on a reactive way. If one organization wants to run very quickly or drive the car very quickly because others are driving their cars quickly, then you'll have to be reactive, because if you go over a hill and there's an accident, not everyone's going to be able to stop. There's going to be large costs. That's what we find. In a reactive state, if I'm idiosyncratic, I can react. It's not as costly if I do it individually. But if I have many, many others that are also reacting at the same time, then the costs become nonlinear and very, very large. So the idea in organizations, you say that either the banks of Slovakia were, because they had learned in the previous crisis, hadn't got up the courage to drive fast again, so they're driving slower this time. But as a result, they're able to withstand the crisis because they had been proactive in their planning. The idea is to think about shock as occurring all the time. And I think one of the problems we have in society generally is that we use more recent data, and we think that we try to model from the more recent data, and we believe that maybe because the recent time has been good and calm over the last 20 years and other shocks haven't affected us dramatically that we've had from 87, 90, 91, 94, etc., 97, 98, 2000, 2001, and all the shocks we had, we got through those without much problem. We went over the hill, there was an accident, we were able to avert it. But this shock, so with that, we can end up believing that we're in a calmer world than we actually are. And so we make mistakes which create shocks. But the idea is that's really that the planning or risk management is trying to say, should I be only reactive or proactive? And you can hedge risk, you can transfer risk, you can think about changing the shape of distributions. There's many things that one can do in a proactive way that have a cost. If I set up a reserve and all my friends have no reserve, their return on capital is going to be much higher. Much higher if they don't need the reserve. But conditional on needing the reserve, I'll be better off. And so that's the trade-offs you have.
Okay, we have time for one more 30-second question. And I apologize to all of you who had 1 minute, 5 minute, or 20-minute questions. We just don't have time for them today. But we do have time for one more 30-second question, and I'm going to give it to a friend. Martin?
Thank you, Richard. I'd like to change the topic completely and ask a for the record question, because we have to make the best use of having the Nobel Prize winning economist here. Professor Scholz, what do you think about tax competition? Are you pro-tax competition, or you don't agree with this concept?
We're very, like having, I have, I better be careful here, Richard. It's in the front row here. My view is...
Just remember, the moderator used to be on the board of the Cayman Island Monetary
I know.
which has zero corporate and personal income taxes. But go ahead.
Right. The problem is with the tax system itself has many uses to it, in the sense that, first of all, it's in our societies generally we're trying to say that we believe in redistribution of income, or that's a public policy which has a redistribution of income, in part maybe because of I won't get into the reasons for that. And the second issue is that the idea we're trying to use the tax system to create incentives. Somehow we think that the tax system, because of externalities or whatever it is going to create incentives. So as a result, we allow for depreciation of assets, or accelerated depreciation, or credits, etc. But we think that the individuals through the tax system can do things more efficiently than the government can do it by government programs. So there's either the government doing it or us as individuals doing it, and so you can use the tax system for that reason. I personally would prefer, and that's been the historical way to do it, but we have to understand the benefits and cost of that, and everything else being equal, obviously I would prefer a system that had a flatter tax, a system that didn't use the incentive system to do it. But as soon as you start having incentives, then basically it results in various entities competing or trying to compete for providing services. A lot of what is done in the system today, a lot of what is called tax benefits, like for example in the United States, the argument about whether corporations that invest abroad should be taxed on their worldwide income or should they be allowed to defer it. It's a fascinating system. The only reason they're allowed to defer is that basically if they can reinvest and make positive present value a project. Otherwise they put it into what's called subpart F income, which is passive, and they happen to be taxed on that. In a worldwide system, we had used in the United States the idea of investing abroad was to encourage that activity. If that's wrong, don't say it's a tax shelter and have one tax system one day and encourage companies and entities to do things, and then change the tax system saying because we encourage you to go abroad and produce and build factories and plants abroad, now somehow that's a tax shelter. So, it depends on the incentives and what one wants to do, and it's a very complicated question to answer.
I'm going to allow Barbara Holm to have the last word because we treated her so poorly, unless the minister would like to speak first. No, Barbara's going to have the last word. If you'd like to make a comment, because we have to, after.
I think that it is necessary to recognize difference what kind of taxes we are speaking. Because even if we are speaking about common market, it is different if we are speaking about direct taxes, income taxes, or indirect, for instance, VAT. For common market, it is good if we have harmonization of the indirect taxes, also VAT, because it is decreasing transaction costs and it is more simple and more transparent. But in the direct taxes, competition is strong incentive for strengthening competition ability and increasing efficiency. And if you're speaking about tax harmonization, income tax harmonization, direct tax harmonization, it is necessary to recognize again difference between rate harmonization and base harmonization. And mostly we are speaking about profit tax. I will give you two figures or two countries for comparison why it is not important only to search on the rate. And this figure will be from 2005, a few years ago. Germany has had profit tax rate 39.5%, almost 40%. But profit tax revenues as share to GDP was 1.6% of GDP. Ireland, on the other side, has had 12.5% rate of the profit tax, but profit tax revenue was 3.4% of GDP. Which means you can see on this that not only rate, but of course also the tax base and general conditions are important. That's the reason why we have been and we are still against the tax rate harmonization, but we are also against tax base harmonization. Despite that we agree that tax base harmonization has positive effects, especially for the lowering transaction costs for the companies who are doing business in different countries. But what is the problem? The problem is, what will be then the common base? If there will be German common base, which is the most narrow, a lot of exemptions, exceptions, deductions, special rates, then of course it will be not working, as you can see from figures which I have mentioned before. Okay, then it was practical discussion as I was finance minister in the ECOFIN. They said, because it is important point, that tax base harmonization is on the program, is on the table. This is something what Commission is working very, very quickly. And they said, okay, because my reservation was, I rejected this, and they said, okay, let's speak about taking Slovak tax base, which is one of the broadest, because we have cancelled almost all exemptions, deductions, special rates, and so on. They said, we will use your Slovak tax base for common tax base for the euro. And then my question was, okay, then I will agree, but do you think it will be acceptable for all you, at that time it was 24 countries, 25 countries, it will be acceptable for all you, 24 countries, to cancel almost all exemptions, exceptions, deductions, special rates? It is politically simply impossible and unrealistic. And that's the point. Another reason is that if we will have common tax base, then it is possible practically to do also tax rate harmonization. Without common base, it is simply impossible. That's the reason why we have been against why it was our position.
Thank you. Barbara.
Well, very quickly. Not only because we are here in your country as an Austrian, I use this example always, and we have to thank you, and especially your government, Mr. Miklos, when you put the flat tax into practice. There is no such other thing as competition, which helps businesses and enterprises to have an incentive and a good location, a good business location. So Austria, thanks to you, had to cut their corporate taxes. And the Federal Minister of Finance was very happy about it. His tax income was much higher after the fact. And this is what many people forget. We have this famous Laffer curve that each politician should have in mind when he makes decision on that. So tax competition is the best thing that ever happens for businesses and enterprises, but also for the individual. Just the last figure. Starting from the 1980s onwards, due to tax competition worldwide, income tax rates have decreased for 25%, and corporate tax rates on average have decreased in the past close to 30 years for 20%. So we have to continue with this tax competition and foster this. This is very important for the economic business location.
And following on from that, so you have to be careful because the government expenditures are taxation. So even though the taxes have fallen, that the government uses debt or uses the central bank to finance its activities, is substitution of taxation to debt. And that's the big problem.
Well, please join me in thanking our really distinguished panel. I think this was really terrific. Thank you all very much for being here, and to our panel.